So I think, so one of the reasons that, we want to sort of elevate the discussion in the network operators group is, to answer the question of the relevance of the traditional telco in the next, never mind 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, maybe 7, maybe 12. And I asked, a good friend and colleague of mine from many years back, Edgar, who's coming up to give the keynote, to come and talk to us about, the changing landscape and what it means for us as operators, but most especially what it means for us as human beings, and what we can do to develop influence from here and take it back into the business to adjust culture towards actually solving the problems of your community. So it's not a typical NOG talk, but it's a talk that speaks to us. And it doesn't matter what the industry is, telecoms, meat packing, same difference. So I'd like to invite Edgar up. Edgar was with, Ericsson, was with Retro Rabbit, is now doing his own thing with IDEX. I won't talk about his accolades because, to be honest, nobody cares about that anymore, and he'll talk more about that. Edgar.
Thank you. Good afternoon. There's nothing in this presentation that's going to give you answers. I want to put that disclaimer. It's going to be very intense. It's something I'm very passionate about. It's something I'm struggling with. Had a very nice conversation with Ben. Had the privilege of doing some work in emerging business in Ericsson before I left, which basically meant I didn't really do anything because innovation is really hard. And it also opened my eyes to what I like to talk about as the abundance era, the era of agility, and the impact of the internet on everything and everybody. And okay, that sounds a bit philosophical, but like on value creation and opening it up. So I'm going to rush through some material. It's really good to be engaging. This typical presentation would have been at least 2 hours, so I will skip a lot of stuff. But it's not so much to go through the slides as to challenge you to think about value, right? I feel like today there's so many buzzwords out there: digital transformation, fourth industrial revolution, platform economy, and I think we miss the simplicity of what value am I creating for my customer, right? Who is my customer, right? And I think we've got to start to really be a little bit more simplistic, and some of it can get philosophical. I think the essence of that allows us to think about value is to think beyond our domains, and that's also a challenge that is historical. So let's dive in. For me, that's my quote. One day I hope it's famous. That's why I didn't put a name down, I just put E. But I think the internet has fundamentally changed everything, and I think much more than we think about, right? Mark and I talk about this all the time. In fact, let me get my smartphone, because I know you guys are all on your smartphones and you're not listening to me. We spend all our time here, right? And I had the privilege to work in innovation. We talk about digital. Digital for me is not a channel, it's a way of life, right? Nobody in this room doesn't have one of these, right? And it's not that you don't have one of these, it's like this is so essential to your life. Like you'd literally leave your wallet, but not your device, right? And I think we sometimes miss what this means in terms of behavior, attention spans, and how this has fundamentally changed business models. So let me give examples, and this is a very basic one, right? Please put up your hand if you've bought a newspaper in the last 2 months, right? It's also going to show the age, right? So why do I give that example? I had the privilege to work with a media company for 2 years. Very hard job. I saw at OR Tambo when I was coming this morning that Washington Post is laying off a couple hundred people. So why do I talk about newspapers, right? Why do I give that example? Because sometimes we don't think about industry. We don't think about behavior. We think about industry, right? So news is a commodity. News is everywhere, right? Imagine you're the CEO of a publication house, right? And there's houses that are publication houses, like. You don't think about news. Your news comes to you in real time on WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, TikTok. There are different generations in this room, right? But this is a real reality for somebody who is running Sunday Times, et cetera, et cetera. I worked with a CEO of a media company and looking at the exponential decline of their revenue. But none of you will wake up and think about newspapers. You don't have to, right? But here's the thing, right? If I asked you, if you were made the CEO of a media company house, for me, it's much more than just going digital. What's your business model? Let me ask a different question. How many of you have paid for news? Forget about buying a newspaper. Subscribe to a news site, right? Again, it shows the age. I'm sorry, guys. We'll talk about that, right? 3 out of 60, right? 5%. So when I had the privilege to work with the media company, I told the CEO, we are not building a news app, right? And I hate to use the word digital platform. Because you've got to think about behavior, not domain. Nobody pays for news. So even if you said, hey, I'm going to build an app, and then I'm going to put a subscription model, you have no users, right? So let's simple examples. If you pull out your smartphone today and counted how many apps, and you guys are geeks, so you must have a lot of them, even the older guys, and then you count how many apps you've used today, right? On average, you have about 80 or 90. You'll have used 6 or 7 today. And it's not by chance, right? It's behavior. Because those apps give you specific value. They're very simplistic, they're very convenient, they're very personalized to you, right? But when we talk about building digital products, we want to talk about technology. Nobody buys technology. I have a big fight. I'm very privileged to work with some banks. I have a big fight with this word fintech. Do any of you wake up in the morning and say, I want to buy a fintech service? What the hell? Why do people talk about fintech? You just want a financial service, and we can talk about financial service more simplistically, more conveniently, more personalized. But there's logic to why we think in terms of domain. And this is why I struggle to explain this slide, right? Because of where we're coming from, right? I liked the lady's presentation. I don't know your name. And I felt so bad. Yes, I was laughing a lot as like, oh my God, this is a tough room, right? No one else was laughing, right? But I liked the presentation because why do you need to still explain what you work? Nobody cares. My 7-year-old son, Mark knows him. He's taught himself the basic fundamentals of 6 programming languages in 4 months, using nothing but Google, YouTube, and some online resources. And this is a true story because the other day we're at Mark's place, and for me, I stopped being fascinated by how these guys move, right? But we still think, oh, coding is a real thing, right? We're IT experts, right? In a world that's abundant, everything that you want to know about any topic is a Google search away, right? When we talk about abundance, we don't talk about the fact that everything about how we grew up was built for us to think about our relevance in terms of our knowledge. Knowledge is a commodity. Right? Not only is knowledge a commodity, domains are a commodity. The world is not boundaryless. So if I asked the CEO of Sunday Times that, do you have a strategy to compete with Twitter? He'd probably say, that's not a real thing for me. Yet he's lost most of his readers. Where'd you get your news, right? Because you don't buy newspapers. Where'd you get your news, right? Where'd you get your news in this room? Because nobody put up their hand for newspapers. Where'd you get your news? Huh? Yeah, so wouldn't be a logical thing that I'm actually competing for attention with Twitter? Right? But we don't think like that. So what would be your strategy? And this is not a trick question. I'm not putting you on the spot. If I made you the CEO of Sunday Times, how do you grow revenue? What's your strategy? Nobody's going to buy newspapers. Nobody's going to subscribe to news platforms. So what's your strategy? Because sometimes we detach business reality from our behavior, right? So we think, oh, me, I'm an editor, but when I'm a user, I don't like this, I'm going to move here, right? There is no detaching. Where you spend your time is where people are making value, creating value. So when you hear things in the press like, oh, and many of them just amaze me these days, right? Like the SABC TV license thing. By the way, TVs are not a reality, right? We don't watch broadcast TV. And SABC is still doing a whole thing about you must pay for TV licenses. Most of our TVs are just smart devices we stream, right? So who needs a TV license, right? But that's not the stuff that is really, really fascinating me, right? Abundance. Do you think about value or do you think about technology? Right, so in my world, digital is very simple. It's about behavior, not apps and technology. And I had a long conversation with Ben, and sometimes a lot of my lessons come from pain. They don't come from expertise that I know this, right? Today I have the privilege to work with 4 MTN markets, and I really can't explain. I'm sorry, I can't explain what I do because I can't define it. But you want to define everything in a box, in a world that is open. Open. So again, I made you the CEO of a media company, a newspaper. What is your revenue? What is your model? So go think about that, right? And if you can crack that, you're going to start opening up your world to value, right? So let's talk about infrastructure, right? I'm coming from Telco, right? And one of the main reasons I left Ericsson was by 2017, it became clear that human beings just want access to the internet, and they don't want to pay for it. Not because they're bad, because everything we do is intrinsically becoming more digital. So if you think about it logically, right? You use 10 times more data than you did last year. You don't think about it subconsciously, but you don't have 10 times more budget. So the real intrinsic value of data just diminishes exponentially. They don't hate you. I was in Ghana in March because I'm doing some work with MTN, and there was a school thing on radio, and this 4-year-old girl wins a competition, and they ask her, what do you want as a present? She said, free Wi-Fi. They want access to the internet. You think about your life as an infrastructure provider, right? What are you giving people access to? It's a commoditized space. No, it's not personal. It's not personal. So today is to challenge you, right? Nobody wakes up and hits a hit in ISP. They just want more data. This is why the #1 complaint from all of even you guys to mobile operators is that you are stealing my data. They're not stealing your data. You're using 10 times more. It's like water. If you wake up in the morning, imagine the water utility company told you, I am going to charge you for a liter of water. When you open the shower, do you count how many liters? Are you saying, oh my God, now I have used 3 liters. I'm going to get a discount. Same thing with data. It's infinite. And you guys are techies, or you're from the ISP world, so you think about these things. A normal user doesn't. He expects it's there. He doesn't hate you. It's value. He doesn't see the value. And I can say the same thing for financial transacting, because this is the challenge of the internet. Every time a service becomes more exponentially used, its intrinsic value disappears. Value shifts. It's not that the thing is bad. And this is why the conversation is not about technology, domain. It's about who is my customer, what is value. I spend time with companies, and some of the things that have shifted in my life scare me. You know, the average age on this continent is 21. I spend time in markets where the average age in the market is 16. The average age of the leadership is 55. When you look at the demographics, 3% of the population is above 55. Who are they building strategy for? And then businesses say, oh my God, this market is hard. Who is your customer? And this is, by the way, for me, this is the only conversation. The only conversation is, who is your customer? In a world where everything is a Google search away, in a world where he controls value, you're the same guy who complains about a service everywhere. But like she said, you tell the people, your customers, no, me, I don't work here. They're not complaining about your price points because they hate you. They're complaining about your price points because it's intrinsically not valuable to them. It's not personal. Come back to the news company. You don't wake up and say, I don't like Sunday Times, these people are selling news. You don't even think about them. And this is playing out in every modern industry. We had a long conversation with Ben, and for me, my only point is lag. It's not that there's any industry that hasn't been disrupted, it's about how much lag you have. And lag has many circumstances. Access to the internet, how easy it is, the demographics of the society, but it is already disrupted. There's nothing that's going to bring back a world where you can force a user to buy a product. If I told you I'm selling you my C-Class 200, blah, 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 2020 model, whatever, the first thing you do is do a Google search. If I told you I'm selling it 200,000, what you do, your first thing is go to Google, and then you tell me intrinsically, Edgar, I found it for 50,000. In that instant, the value of the car is 50,000. You have choice. It doesn't matter what I say. This plays out everywhere, guys, and this is to trigger you. The world has shifted, and so do we. You're not bad people. You have to think about value. That's all. The conversation is not about digital transformation, fourth industrial revolution, AI, machine learning, blah, 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 and technology is an enabler. But it's an enabler to the experience and the value you're creating for the customer. So the question is, who is my customer and what is value for him? Not how am I going to sell him this router at a better price. He expects it to be. So you're the CEO of a news company, right? What's your business strategy, guys? Because I've not heard even one business strategy come up. But we want to talk about this all the time. How do we deal with the world when everything that we grew up in was around closed domains? We had a whole conversation about this. Fixed domains, fixed industries. I am an IT guy. He's this. My son doesn't even think about those things. He's showing me every day the extent at which his website has gone. And he has an attention span of a 7-year-old, so obviously it's not great. But 3 months down the line, it's different. And then you will come to me and say, oh, Edgar, I'm charging you $200 a day to build your website. Really? In 2022? Is that value? Right? Do you think about what access you have and how that informs choices and how that makes you think about value? Because that's the only conversation today. Because when you go back and reflect your lives, and this is why the conversation can get philosophical. You do not separate your behavior, what you expect as a user, from what you produce as a professional. Because the only thing you need to think about every day when you're building your product is, would I use it? Would I pay for it? Do I love it? How do I make it better? You know, we're talking about innovation. Innovation is not complicated for me, by the way, guys. It's about how do I make my product better? And I've had my fingers burnt building user experiences, right? And the only thing that I learned from that journey is that if you wake up every day and make the experience better, it gets closer to the user acceptance, because you don't control. 90% of what we built when we're building this digital app never worked. 90%, that's how high it was, but we were moving fast. So when the CEO woke up and we had 500,000 users after 18 months, he didn't also see that we had 150 software updates. And that in the first month, that was 5,000 users, and everybody's like, you're gonna fail. But the thing is that I was a little bit lucky at that time. My world had started changing. I didn't appreciate how fast users move until I would look at the data. You sit in a room with a bunch of software developers, and you're like, this is a really cool feature, right? We're gonna put sock highlights, blah, blah, blah. You discuss it, you're like, this is cool. You launch it in the market, and it has 5 users. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nobody has your time, right? And then in an instant, you think, crap. They're comparing this feature to their ESPN app, their BBC app, their Premiership app, where the user experience is 50,000 times better. That's your reality. In an open world, your users will compare you in real time to where they spend their time. Where do you guys spend 90% of your time? Where have you spent 90% of your day today? Tell me, right? This is not a trick question, guys. Again, it's to force you to think about behavior. Yeah? And not just the internet. We're on the internet, right? What platforms, what apps? And this is not by chance. And life is not hard, by the way. If you think in these principles, you will build good user experiences. You'll build good products. But no, you think in terms of technology. You want to kill people with your feature list. Nobody cares. Some of the things I'm trying to do with MTN, like really basic stuff, is like nobody comes to your website for information anymore. When people come to your website, they want to access your product and buy it and use it as simply as possible. Stop telling us about us. If you go to Apple, will you find an about us section? That the CEO of this Apple is blah, blah, blah. We've been here since 1994. This is what you'll find on the MTN website. Yet the normal user just wants to go there, order a SIM card, or order a data product, or order this, change this, and move on. That's what you behave. But when you build, you do the opposite. Who are you building for? Are you building for yourselves? Are you building for the user? Again, not a trick question, guys. Don't worry, I'm intense for effect. Who is your user? Who is your customer? What is value? If you just focus on that, everything else becomes clear. Even what you need to do to put value on top of your product. Who is your user? So do you have those questions, guys? So I hate the word design thinking because I also talk about design thinking. But for me, design thinking is simply waking up and building a product based on a real customer need. Not because we've done it for the last 20 years, right? And those are the challenging things. I liked her slide where the guy was trying to explain BGP. Imagine Sky new reporter still feels he's going to tell the whole world what BGP is when there's Google right next door. Do you know how many times my son tells me when I'm stuck, Dad, use Google? Like, he tells me, Dad, use Google. And like one time I was literally about to take his Nintendo Switch to Sandton City, and they'd have charged me 500 Rand just to book it in before they even do diagnostics. And it was just a simple thing of doing Google and say you can actually do a cold reboot. And after his persistence, I actually used Google and I did the cold reboot. 500 Rand. But how do you translate the fact that half of you guys do stuff off YouTube, and that was stuff you used to take to some carpenter or some guy out there and translate the revenue losses and the shifts in value, right? And also for me is to challenge you guys to think about how you can create value. You have a question? Is that a question? Oh, it's... By the way, guys, you can ask a question at any time. This is not to go through all the slides. It's to challenge you. So in my work, which has been very painful, transformation came down to agility. And I hate to use that word because, again, agility is a misused word. It's about being dynamic, learning from the user, improving the product, understanding that you do not control the narrative. It's a hard shift. It's a real shift. So, by the way, don't be any disillusioned that your companies have an infinite budget for your salaries, right? their margins are declining, and I see these things in real time, and it's not to scare you. But today is to challenge you to not make this conversation about technology, but to make it about the person you're serving and his need. And that will help you see things. When we talked extensively with Ben. I wish Andrew had stayed, because I have seen the effect of companies that say I have innovation hubs, and these are PR things, right? Because innovation takes risk. It takes personal risk, it takes failure. I do not listen to somebody who has not failed, because that person knows what it means to build, right? So when we talk about conviction is so important when you're doing something new. You are going to fail, not failure, because failure is never fatal. There's nothing in the world is fatal if you're not moving. It's only fatal if you do it once and you stop. But we don't talk about these things. Culture, culture, culture. And the only reason IDEX was born was that I burnt my hands as a CEO of a small software company, and I was supposed to do business development on the continent, and I met about 20 banks. And it was all the same thing. Everybody got excited. Oh, this is great technology, Edgar. Yeah, we're going to execute. And you could never execute. Because the moment it came to actually executing the product, some dude in some department realized, but this tech thing might take away my relevance. The immune system. Because the immune system was not built around product value, it was built around individual relevance domains. The structural and cultural reality of the industrial era is our problem in a world that's free. So you can't see barriers, right? You can't see divisions. You must have a simplistic mindset. You've got to see value. And in order to execute on value, you are going to piss off a few people. It doesn't work in a straight line. And it's not that I'm advocating, but let me be clear, I'm not advocating for you to go and be rebels. I'm advocating for the fact that when you see a customer need, the most important thing is to figure out how to execute on that, because that's where revenue comes from. Revenue doesn't come from a nice PowerPoint presentation that's going to impress your boss. Your boss is busy thinking about his next move, right? This is a reality. I've been an executive in Ericsson, and I know how painful these things are, right? Revenue comes from you thinking deeply about customer problems. Revenue comes from the right culture around speed, learning, experimentation. I'm going to share some videos because this can feel intense. I feel like it's really feeling intense. I don't see, today is not to scare you. Today is to trigger you. There are no answers here. I spend most of my time trying to work with business to innovate, and I can tell you, largely, it is not very successful. But we chip away day by day, and we're getting there. And all the things that you hear about creating ambidexterity, taking small risks, and ultimately, for me, it came down to the fact that you cannot innovate in this era if you are not emotionally invested in what you do. Transactability of work. Why do you go to work? Right? Is it because there's a paycheck on the 25th? Is it because you really care about what you do? To take personal risk needs you to be invested emotionally. And it's an exciting place to be, but our cultures were not built for that. And my reality is that you guys have the possibility. In fact, I look at Mark and some of the things he can do, but I find that he's sometimes trapped in the CCOM ecosystem, right? Ecosystem Ben, right? Ecosystem. Our structures were not built for innovation, and this is not about challenging structures. It's about really realizing that we live in a world where users have choices. And the structural reality of businesses that are built inside out has to change to businesses that are built outside in. When people talk about this word co-creation, because it's another nice buzzword, right? It's a real thing. So how many of you guys have looked at customer data this week? Another question, not a trick question, right? How many of you guys have looked at customer data this week? So who are you building for? If you haven't looked at customer data, I gave a keynote at MTN, and MTN, the guy before me on stage did an impressive slide. They have some really fantastic tools they're building around data. And they have 300 million subscribers on the continent. And this room was full of 60 of their leaders. And I asked them, how many of you looked at customer data this week? There was not a single hand. So what's the point of a tool if you don't really want to learn or listen to the user? So how do we reconcile these things? Guys, who are you building for? Nobody put up his hand. Nobody has looked at customer data this week. And this is not even a rhetorical question. Okay, you did. Very good. And I'm not going to judge you for the beard, right? It's the mindset, right? It's the mindset. We're not talking about Gen Z, and they are really interesting people. We're talking about a world that's open, right? We're talking about what guides what you do is impact. We're talking about creating value is not a straight path. We're talking about how to create the environments that are really, truly agile. We had a bit of a conversation with Ben. We're talking about a world where if you openly look at the user, he's free. You can't control him. So how are you going to build for him if you don't know him? And I'm challenging you guys in a good way. No answers in 45 minutes. This is quite a long process. I know the painful way. I've worked with one bank for 2 years, and we've hardly moved, right? Very close to the board chair now, which is good. We're having really honest conversations about agility and how agility is not something you do, like Ben was discussing. Agility is not something that happens in the corner. Agility is something you become. Agility is being open to learning from the user and adapting what you do, not being constrained by your job title, your position, your relevance in the organization, right? This whole world where strategy is built from the top, whereas the reality is that all of you need to go to work thinking about solving customer problems. So do you guys think about customer problems? Or you're so inundated with your product realities, right? So who are you building for? And again, not a trick question. Who is your customer? My son struggles when I'm not in the car. In fact, the other day, I realized that the only reason he wants to go with me in the car because he knows I have a hotspot. So the other day, I was like, why aren't you going with your mom? She's like, after a long discussion, it turns out that she doesn't have a hotspot, so there's no internet, right? That's the only reason, right? It's a logical reason, right? Because everything he does is digital. Do you look at the world through the lens of your product? Or do you look at the world through the eyes of the customer? And there's nothing wrong with our products, guys, and this is the whole conversation we're having with Ben. For me, it's not that the product is extremely bad. It's that, does the product add value to the customer? Can we improve it? Innovation is not tricky. It's about just making things better. And it's not a department. It's how do we show up every day? Because we actually innovate in every aspect of our lives except work. That's reality. You innovate as parents, you innovate as friends, you innovate when you're doing the barbecue. Mark will definitely innovate when he's inviting us over. Like he'll mix the best wines and stuff. You ask a parent, a child will never come to a dad and says, Dad, I want to go to a new school, and the dad won't figure it out. But when you come to work, you just go into autopilot. In fact, Elon Musk said it, like these corporate people are like characters in a PC game. And in my world, like the last 3-4 years, that's what I feel when I enter some of these companies. I mean, I was in corporate world. But now when I enter a bank, I'm like, oh my God, what did they do to these people? You know, like zombies. Like you're stuck in the matrix, right? Why? Why do you go to your bank and say, I don't like the forms, I don't like this, you're too slow, you're too do-do-do. But when you go to work, you don't say, boss, this doesn't make sense, we're too slow. This interface, customer can't define it himself. He can't set up the router himself. We don't give him a user experience. He can't solve the problem himself. Why do you think there's a mix? Even I liked your slide when you're saying that, you know, when customers say, oh, I just changed the router. That's what they want. I'm not saying that it's going to be as easy as that, but that's what they want. And they control, right? And every day they can't change the router themselves. They're going to find another ISP. They're not bad. Again, newspaper example. Value moved. They're freer. You don't control. And it's not a bad world, guys. I'm deliberately intense. We could have a whole conversation. I'm deliberately intense to trigger you. Think about who you're building for. That's it. And okay, I'm not going to skip this because we talk about, you know, ambidexterity. But it's not easy. Transformation isn't about shifting structures. It's about creating freedom in an organization for people to ask the right questions around value. You guys in this room, if you don't ask the questions, that customer is leaving the building. Who pays your salary? I've had some interesting conversations in banks in the last couple of weeks, right? Because, you know, the governance is heavy. And like, Edgar, this risk guy is just, I'm like, dude, let's be clear. I work with a bank in Uganda, I can't disclose for confidential reasons, where 90,000 people closed bank accounts last year. 90,000. I literally told the CEO, why isn't this thing a big billboard in the entrance? So when your employees walk in, they see the number changing. That's 20% of their active user base. There's nobody in this room that has not changed a bank account at least twice in the last 3 years. I'm 100% sure. It's not about technology or whatever, it's about value, simplicity. You're just fed up of things that don't work, that are not simplistic, that are not convenient for you. You don't hate the bank. You don't even care about them. It's just got to work. Is that how you build your products? Do you just wake up, it's just got to work? Guys, again, not trick questions. But this is hard, guys, right? This is hard. That's why I say that today is not to tell you about innovation and make it like this sexy thing, right? It's to challenge you to think about value. When you try to do something difficult or different, right? The immune system will attack you. We were built to be conformist people. You can blame our education system, number one. This education system that still measures people on memorizing stuff is archaic as it becomes. When Elon Musk says, I don't care whether you went to school or where you went to school, why would you need someone to memorize when Alexa will tell him everything? When Google is there, why does he have to memorize stuff? Think about it logically, guys. Don't think about it in terms of how you went to school. We went to school when there was no internet. Well, some of us. Some of us, right? The internet came when we were in uni. Some of us, not all of us, you know. Yeah, some of us are old. We just became crazy. Yeah. But what's the logic? Knowledge-based system when everything is on Google. And again, it's not that Google will solve all your problems. Abundance. The conversation is abundance, guys. Our structures are built for scarcity. That's why somebody wants to read his bio. Mark knows I don't want you to read my bio. It means nothing, right? Like this, I've changed so much in 3 years. People still want to talk to me about Ericsson, and I love Ericsson. I grew up there, right? But in the last 3 years, I've changed so much. But you want to read Edgar has a master's in engineering. He's an expert in innovation, blah, blah, blah. Dude, I'm learning every day, right? I'm figuring it out as I go. Not literally always, right? Expertise is a commodity. But you still define yourself by expertise, not impact. That's the conversation. But how do you define yourself by impact, right? I feel like I should play one video and come back to purpose. How do you find yourself by impact? Why do you show up, right? A lot of my journey became very philosophical, but before we become philosophical, let's play Elon Musk so that, Steve Jobs, so that we can have something more light. So they ask him a question, right? And I don't play this because I want you to copy Apple. This is not one of those things where I say, be like Apple, be like Amazon. I want you to think about behaviors, right? I want you to think about some of the things that helped, I don't know these people, build great institutions and the risks that they took, and thinking about stuff differently. Let's just play. It's a 2-minute video. And Mark, please keep me honest because I don't know how long we've been going.
Yes.
Mr. Jobs, you're a bright and influential man.
Here it comes.
It's sad and clear that on several counts you've discussed, you don't know what you're talking about. I would like, for example, for you to express in clear terms how, say, Java, in any of its incarnations, addresses the ideas embodied in OpenDoc. And when you're finished with that, perhaps you could tell us what you personally have been doing for the last 7 years.
You know, you can please some of the people some of the time, but one of the hardest things when you're trying to affect change is that people like this gentleman are right in some areas. I'm sure that there are some things OpenDoc does, probably even more that I'm not familiar with, that nothing else out there does. And I'm sure that you can make some demos, maybe a small commercial app that demonstrates those things. The hardest thing is, how does that fit in to a cohesive, larger vision that's going to allow you to sell $8 billion, $10 billion of product a year? And one of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that. And I think that's the right path to take.
Well, it's not a straight line, right? What problem are you solving? What are customers actually saying? Nobody actually looked at customer data this week, right? Impacting lives is not a philosophical thing. It's value, right? Because today they are thinking in real time, how does this benefit me? And when we truly get to the point of trying to understand them, that becomes obvious, right? But we were not built like this, guys, and this is why I'm challenging you today, and this is why it's particularly intense. We were not built like this. We were not built. Our structural reality is product first, not customer first. You hear companies talk all the time about customers. We love customers, blah, blah, blah. Only thing they go in retreats is talk about the product strategy, right? And there's nothing wrong with products. There's only something wrong with products if it doesn't solve a customer need. And so you're having honest conversations about customer needs. And the reason I brought the newspaper example, we could have so many examples, we could talk about them all day, is our customers have choices, which means they determine value, which means we gotta really deeply try to understand them. And that means that we have to care about the customer. So when Ben and I were discussing this philosophical side, and I feel like the room has become very heavy, so I'm not going to go down into the deep philosophical side, but the reality is that if you are going to truly solve for a customer, you've got to know him. And especially in a world where he's moving fast. I don't even try to catch up with my 7-year-old son. I got it a little bit wrong because I told my wife, my projection was at 10, he'll be faster than me. He's already faster than me. I haven't told him, but I can see it, right? I didn't grow up in this world, right? And for me, it's not so much about he's faster than me or he's not faster than me. It's about what is value for him, because I'm building for him. And this is the essence of modern businesses. This is the essence for you guys, right? And talking about the abundance era, or whatever it is, agility, is a different muscle we have to build in an organization, because we are in a different world. That's when I asked you that, are you competing? So this is why this buzzword platform is coming up, because everybody's saying it. MTN is saying it, Standard Bank is saying it, because everybody's saying that now we want to be the mall, we want to compete for attention. The reality is we are. But competing for attention doesn't mean building a super app like NetBank. I bet you none of you are using their super app, right? Because people think I've built a super app and I'm going to be like Amazon. How many of you have used that super app? I don't even know what it looks like. I don't bank with NetBank. Yeah, Evo, yeah. See? Point exactly, right? And it's not a trick question, right? It's not about super apps. It's about starting with something small, meaningful, valuable to the user, learning from him, and figuring out how to continuously solve problems. And I bank with FNB. I don't think they're perfect. This is for me not to say they're good. But their ecosystem is rich, and I actually think that they could do a lot better in the user experience. But you know, when I spend time with banks and we say that, look, I'm like, you've got to give away the transaction. You can't charge people for banking. But keep the community by building a richer ecosystem on top. Because that, even if you think about it from a lazy perspective, right? If you keep your customers, you will make 50 times when they take a facility than that lousy bank charge of 250 Rand that's now annoying me. I want to close my bank account for 250 Rand and you'll miss my 1 million mortgage. Because we don't think about values. We think about the transaction, the spreadsheet, right? When MTN is now separating its GSM and mobile money business, the reality is that most of the markets have been shielded by mobile money. GSM is either flat or declining. But then I tell the mobile money people, so how are you going to make money if 50% of your revenue is P2P, transaction fees, when transaction fees is not going to be a reality? And it's not even about transaction fees not going to be a reality. For me, it's as simplistic as what is value? It's a simple equation. Is it simple for you guys? And I encourage you for it to become simple for you guys. And the only way this becomes simple is you've got to simplify your life. Your life is not your job description, right? Your life is not summed up in your JD. Your life is that passion you bring every day to what you do. This is important for you as much as an individual, as an employee, as a product person. In fact, this is so important that if you just build this philosophy, you will build incredible products. I had never built an app, and in 6 months, we're the fastest growing digital platform in Uganda, right? And I don't think that app was perfect. It was a simple philosophy of waking up every day, and that's the only thing I'd do. I did 2 things every day. I woke up, opened the experience, and used it myself. And when we went into the stand-up, I said, guys, this doesn't feel right. And the second thing I did is look at the data. So every time we deployed something, I looked at the data. And I'd come back to the team and say, guys, I thought this was going to scale. Clearly, it's not. And that simple philosophy, when you talk about agility, is just simply waking up and looking at value for the customer and improving the product. It's not harder than that. But you can't do that if you're just stuck in the product spec because it's the company strategy. And yet, when you go home, you tell your wife, I don't believe in this strategy. And I'm like, why are you telling your wife? What are you doing when you're in the office? Where's the courage to challenge? And not based on disrespect, right? We're not advocating for fights. We're saying, talk about value. Talk about value. Businesses are not its products. Businesses are smart people like you, and I've seen it, right? But show up, guys. Show up at work. Challenge. The same way you challenge on Twitter. Right? The same way you challenge everywhere else in your world. Why do you go from this very rich world everywhere else and enter the workroom and you become a robot? Literally. Why? There is no work-life separation in abundance era. There's showing up doing stuff that you love. And I'm going to tell you for a fact that if you don't love it, find what you do. And that's not philosophical. Of course, the first 2 years will be hard. But you will become exponential. I see where IDEX is growing, right? And I always tease Mark. But today, right, if I told you my week last week, where I was with 3 board chairs and 3 CEOs in the same week talking about value, of course, very difficult conversations that don't move. I didn't enter those rooms because I'm smarter than you. I entered those rooms because I live by a simple philosophy. I do stuff that I think is going to be impactful. And yes, there's some balance to the madness, so it doesn't look as simple as that. But if you show up like that, you will have impact. You don't even have to leave your job. You will build better products. Why don't you ask? Why? Why? It's simple. And I know it is not easy, but it is simple. And the true connection to being able to live with that simplicity is bring your convictions to your environment. Don't be disrespectful. Bring your convictions. Show up and challenge. Ask why. Let's play the Steve Jobs. It's a bit long, but I'll stop there so we can have Q&A. I don't know how much time we've done. I really would like at least a bit of time for Q&A, but let's play the Steve Jobs, another Steve Jobs video. Yeah? Okay, the Steve Jobs video will eat 7 minutes into it, so maybe we won't. Okay, we'll play it anyway. It's somewhere. Oh, it was at the end. It's an interesting video he did a long time ago. It's on YouTube. It's nothing new. But listen to it, and there's so many things to it.
To me, marketing's about values. This is a very complicated world. It's a very noisy world. And we're not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us. No company is. And so we have to be really clear on what we want them to know about us. Now, Apple, fortunately, is one of the half a dozen best brands in the whole world. Right up there with Nike, Disney, Coke, Sony. It is one of the greats of the greats, not just in this country, but all around the globe. And But even a great brand needs investment and caring if it's going to retain its relevance and vitality. And the Apple brand has clearly suffered from neglect in this area in the last few years. And we need to bring it back. The way to do that is not to talk about speeds and feeds. It's not to talk about MIPS and megahertz. It's not to talk about why we're better than Windows. The dairy industry tried for 20 years to convince you that milk was good for you. It's a lie, but they tried anyway. And the sales were going like this. And then they tried Got Milk, and the sales are going like this. Got Milk doesn't even talk about the product. Matter of fact, it focuses on the absence of the product. But the best example of all, and one of the greatest jobs of marketing the universe has ever seen is Nike. Remember, Nike sells a commodity. They sell shoes. And yet, when you think of Nike, you feel something different than a shoe company. In their ads, as you know, they don't ever talk about the product. They don't ever tell you about their air soles and why they're better than Reebok's air soles. What does Nike do in their advertising? They honor great athletes, and they honor great athletics. That's who they are. That's what they are about. Apple spends a fortune on advertising. You'd never know it. You'd never know it. So, when I got here, Apple just fired their agency. We're doing a competition with 23 agencies that, 4 years from now, we'll pick one. And we blew that up, and we hired Shive-Day, the ad agency that I was fortunate enough to work with years ago. We created some award-winning work, including the commercial voted the best ad ever made in 1984 by advertising professionals. And we started working about 8 weeks ago. And the question we asked was, our customers want to know who is Apple and what is it that we stand for? Where do we fit in this world? And what we're about isn't making boxes for people to get their jobs done, although we do that well. We do that better than almost anybody in some cases. But Apple's about something more than that. Apple, at the core, its core value, is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe. And we've had the opportunity to work with people like that. We've had an opportunity to work with people like you, with software developers, with customers who have done it in some big and some small ways. And we believe that in this world, people can change it for the better. And that those people that are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that actually do. And so what we're going to do in our first brand marketing campaign in several years is to get back to that core value. A lot of things have changed. The market's a totally different place than it was a decade ago. And Apple's totally different, and Apple's place in it is totally different. And believe me, the products and the distribution strategies and the manufacturing are totally different, and we understand that. But values and core values, those things shouldn't change. The things that Apple believed in at its core are the same things that Apple really stands for today. And so we wanted to find a way to communicate this. And what we have is something that I am very moved by. It honors those people who have changed the world. Some of them are living, some of them are not. But the ones that aren't, as you'll see, you know that if they'd ever used a computer, it would have been a Mac. And the theme of the campaign is Think Different. It's the people, honoring the people who think different and who move this world forward. And it is what we are about. It touches the soul of this company. So I'm going to go ahead and roll it, and I hope that you feel the same way about it I do. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Think different. Don't change the world. Thank you so much, guys. It's very difficult, and I know it's a bit uncomfortable. And it's a pity we don't have time for Q&A, but we'll have a little bit. Okay. Please, guys, open season.
Sure. Guys, I'm sober now. Any questions?
Hi, Sean from Rocking Connect. You're a Tom Peters fan, aren't you?
I'm a what?
You're a Tom Peters fan.
I've read some of his books, not necessarily a fan. I've read a lot of books in my life. There's some I
Your
really
presentation is very sort of Tom Peters.
Is it? Okay.
Just a question from, obviously, organizational standpoints.
Yeah.
Your focus is on solving customer problems rather than having products that necessarily just get pushed to customers. In a landscape like we see, where we have large ISPs, and this room is representative of that, where you have large ISPs as well as small ISPs, where do you think the advantage lies in that kind of mind shift?
I think that's a good question, right? I think that's why I'm very cautious when I answer, because I don't think there's a silver bullet, and that's why I put it there, that it's not a silver bullet. I think you have an advantage. So when you're a small ISP, your advantage is speed. Your disadvantage is resources. When you're a large ISP, your advantage is resources. Your disadvantage is speed. And somewhere in between lies a balance, right? So when we think about it, is that small ISPs eventually win because they're running fast and failing fast and breaking rules, and eventually they hit customer sweet spots. One thing I want to be clear about, at least it's very clear for me, we don't scale because of marketing and sales. We scale because of hit customer value. And that becomes eventually exponential growth, because the reality is that when we love a product, we tell others about it, right? And the journey to love a product is not a straight path. Large ISPs, in the short term, have a big advantage because they have the resources to experiment on business models. They just don't have the culture, right? And I think when I started doing what I did, I kind of underestimated how difficult it is to change culture. I kind of thought, this is a big company, they've got a lot of money, we'll go talk about innovation, and it's going to work, right? And like the conversations we had with Ben, the reality is that our structural reality, large companies have a lot of short-term pressures. They also typically have executives that are no longer hungry. It's just so many levels of complexity, or who are very incentivized for the short term, but they have the advantage of resources, right? And so in a lot of my work, I don't think large companies will change themselves because they want to. I think they'll change themselves because people like you will light enough fires, right? And so when I think about you guys and where you work, if you're in a large ISP, you've got to be like the Steve Jobs video, right? You've got to think different. You've got to be. And the challenge with that is that that's why you look at the video. He didn't say, oh, these are clever guys. He said, these are the troublemakers. You know, the change made, round pegs in a square hole, the rebels, right? Nothing of change, nothing impactful happens without tension. I like to talk about creative tension. You've got to be convicted enough to create enough creative tension in a business, not disrespect. And for me, the difference between those two is arguing impact. So the problem is that we don't have psychological safety in large businesses. There's so many layers. We are typically afraid to speak up. And so when you're in a room and you actually have a good idea, You know, it's like if you put up your hand, how could you say that, right? But I think if you put up your hand and say, look, I did this, I went to the market, my wife looked at this product, blah, blah. If you talk about value, it's a different conversation. Even if it causes, for lack of a better word, a few people to look at you, right? It's almost like in order to do things that have impact, you can't be worried about what other people think. For me, that's a simplistic way to put it. It's not that you're disrespectful. It's that when you are trying to do something meaningful, the business model, everybody in the business will say, hey, you're crazy. And for me, we didn't touch on that. The heart of that is conviction. But your question is a very complicated one because somewhere in the middle lies the sweet spot. And that's why many small companies, unfortunately, don't last long enough. They probably die just before because they run out of resources, and many big companies just don't move because they're too comfortable. I think the best balance, and in my work, in closing on that point, is that businesses have to become smarter at creating ambidexterity. So any new ideation has got to be separated. It doesn't have to be like a big spin-off, but it's not measured in the same way. You measure different things. So you don't measure return on investments. You measure things like customer feedback, customer growth, because those things ultimately become return on investment. You don't measure how much am I making from all these new routers. You measure, are people loving the product? Is the product growing? Even if you're in sort of like a negative revenue pace, anything that has customer traction eventually becomes revenue. Anything that is purely revenue focused eventually pisses off a customer. But it's not a perfect science. Yes.
Hi, Graham Menica from Vumatel. You mentioned the psychological safety thing, and I might be going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but...
All the stuff is down a rabbit hole, so please go, right? Nothing here is not down a rabbit hole.
But my sense is that South African businesses are particularly bad at this.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true or if it's just an impression I have.
Yeah.
But do you think that that's holding back South African business more so than other parts of the world where agility is working better because the business environment is structured in a better way for psychological safety?
The irony is that you actually see a lot of innovation coming out of South Africa, so I don't want to generalize. So what I can say is that it's a double-edged sword. I think there's a lot of legacy of, for lack of a better word, control in South African, but I think it's not specific to South African businesses. But I also see that there's a lot of innovation because of also your history. Your history has two sides to the coin, right? Because of being cut out from the world, a lot of innovation happened. But also because of a very controlled structure, a controlled culture, I mean, coming out that, you know, there's also a lot of hierarchy kind of behaviors, right? You know, the boss wants you in the office, right? In this day and age where if you have an internet connection, you will work. He wants to see you, right? So a lot of these behaviors are historical. I don't want to generalize because I've actually met a lot of innovative leaders here, but I think that the cultural nuances are. So sometimes also when you think about some innovation, like someone talked about M-Pesa before we went for lunch, is that sometimes when you have constraints, you innovate more, right? When you have comfort, it's harder, but I really don't like generalizations. I think that the hierarchical structural rigidity is not a South African only context. It's the reality of how, in my mind, industrial era companies were built, right? There will be a little bit of cultural nuances. It will be a bit more in certain cultural contexts, but I just came from Rwanda and we're doing a lot of work with MTN. And in a lot of the sessions, it was coming out, but Edgar, you know, here we don't speak up, right? And I'm like, yes, I mean, you know, these things come up all the time. And I say that we particularly have that because speaking up was not your pay grade, right? But today, the cultural, if you speak up and a lot of what's coming out is things that are going to help customers, no one will ignore you. They might say, who is this guy who said this stuff? But the points will land. So we always try to talk about, you've got to be convicted. And this is why I have a problem with modern business today, and many of you in this room, right, is that if you're going to innovate, you can't worry what the guy next to you is going to think if you believe it's a good idea. So we don't speak up because we're like, oh my God, what will Mark say, what will so say? If you really believe it's a good idea, speak up. Sometimes, and I've seen it a lot in some of the businesses I've been in, the CEO just has no clue because all the data, all the data he's getting is making him believe that this product works. when suddenly he listens to some dude left side, and he's like, oh my God, that's actually a good idea. One true story from my side is that when I was leaving Ericsson builds the MTN wallet platform. And in 2016, Ericsson did a global restructure. And as part of that global restructure, they fired the CEO, they were bringing a new one, and MTN Group is one of Ericsson's biggest customers on the continent. And as they were in the transition, they started to try and simplify their business, because Ericsson was largely an infrastructure business. So they were like, this mobile thing we're doing, this wallet thing we're doing with MTN, we don't understand it, right? I think we should kill it. So they told MTN Group in October 2016 that we're going to phase our life out of, so we're going to manage this product to extinction. We're not going to build anything new, we're going to operate it, find a new vendor. The CEO of Ericsson was appointed in January. He came to South Africa for a town hall. And when it was Q&A, I put up my hand, because I just happened to be from Uganda, and I said, look, mobile money is the only place that MTN is growing. If you look at Uganda, Rwanda, Ghana, all the markets where MTN is actually growing its mobile money, and the context is that financial inclusion or banking ecosystem was not as advanced as South Africa. People were putting money on buses, and suddenly they could use a distribution network to send and receive money. I said it's solving problems. And the CEO looked at me and said, Edgar, this makes sense. I'm on the board of Alibaba. And he then looked at me and said, speak to this lady, we have to change our strategy. Now, if I hadn't put up my hand, that product's dead. And of course, I was still a bit senior at that time, to be honest. I wasn't senior as like executive group level, but I was senior enough. But still took a risk in a room where the entire global executive team of Ericsson was there. And I spoke for 10 minutes passionately about the fact that this product actually makes sense. Like, there was no emotional connection to it. I was like, it just doesn't make sense. MTN is growing, right? So once you have clarity of impact, you must find courage. It's never going to be given to you. There will never be an environment where they're like, okay, guys, now we're going to have new ideas. Please come up with all your new ideas. You have to say, this doesn't work. And that means you've taken a bit of personal risk, and we're not going to talk about that, so I'll stop there because you have a long day. But you've got to be convicted enough. It's not a South African thing, right? So I don't want you to think that South African businesses are bad. Okay. It's a cultural thing.
Last one. Are you sure? Yep.
You have a question?
Okay.
I want him to comment because he's the one who put up his hand many times. So,
last one, because we need.
I'm sorry, mine wasn't a comment. It was a response to Graham as well. You know, we have the Cape Townians and the Joburgers.
Yes,
the Cape Townians export in the IT industry in Cape Town is 95% export. We invented cloud computing. We have engineers working for Amazon and so forth. In Joburg, the IT industry is 98% import. You have Google salespeople selling Google products and Oracle and IBM and all that kind of stuff.
No, exactly. It's not either or, right? I mean, here they have a culture of doing stuff. I like that. Joburg guys, innovate.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Edgar.